community. I meet people and they're always like, pine, 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 pine. You always hear about the Pine Project, so it's awesome. They're super busy and doing so many amazing things. Andrew's been doing outdoor education for over 20 years. He's led canoe trips with camps, and as I said, he started P.i.n.e. in 2008. He's going to talk a little bit more about himself, so I said I wouldn't say too much. But we're very excited for YRNC and the P.i.n.e. Project to be partnering for this awesome conference. And I will stop talking and now I really will have no voice, but I will turn it over to Andrew. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you. Can you hear me back there? Got it, yeah, okay. I usually come with a pretty good microphone installed, so I didn't think I'd need this. So here we are, my favorite topic, talking about me and P.i.n.e. Any of my staff will tell you that is true. So I apologize in advance, but I also just want to say a huge thank you for showing up. I'm not an author, I'm not famous. As much as Jasmine just made it sound like P.i.n.e. is famous, we're not. We're a little, tiny little grassroots organization, and yet we are doing really amazing, innovative, transformative work. And so the intention today is to share a bit of that with you, is to tell some stories of what that looks like, to help you understand my own journey with learning that I didn't know anything about nature connection, and I still know very little after many, many years, and a lot of experiences in really challenging situations in the wild. And then to draw out some of the learning from that. You know, what can we actually use, what can we take away from today and use with our little kids who are probably in a schoolyard somewhere without a park anywhere nearby, and we have hurdles and hurdles and hurdles and challenges and challenges and challenges that we face every day that we have to figure out a way to overcome if we're ever going to connect ourselves first and then our kids to nature. So that's kind of the goals of today. Myself, I grew up in Toronto, so I'm positioned fairly well to talk a little bit about urban nature connection and connecting with nature where it's rare. I happen to spend a bunch of time growing up outside, free. You probably are here because you've heard the statistics around how much freedom we had as kids, how much freedom our parents and grandparents had as kids, and how little the kids of today have. And it's decreased exponentially every generation. I managed to run around free and get into a lot of trouble as a kid and make, I think, all the mistakes, which was really helpful. I learned a lot from making tons of mistakes. And I grew up in Toronto. I got to get in and out of the city. I remember, wandering down little streams with my brothers when we were small, and me and my middle brother would be taking care of my youngest brother, which didn't always work out so well for him. And we would come home when my mom rang a bell, and there's just so much trust there that when I'm working with kids today, I don't see. It's much more rare, and so I recognize now the benefits that I got, and part of my upbringing and all of the benefits I got was what inspired me to start P.i.n.e. I remember as a teen, turning into sort of a young 20-something man who thought he knew everything. Being introduced to a couple of mentors that just asked me some really good questions, told me some really amazing stories, and helped me to go home with new eyes and realize I didn't know a single thing about the place that I called home. I remember in second year biology, and this was sort of my own accord, I remember coming out of an exam in second year biology that I had studied for a lot, like 10 days of just cramming about trees and life cycles and all this kind of stuff. Wrote the exam, got a whatever, walking home exhausted, looked up, I was at school in Kingston, looked up at the crazy red squirrels that are everywhere, not actual red squirrels, they're gray squirrels, but they're the color red, they're really funky there. Anyways, they're chasing each other through trees, and I just realized looking at them, then looking at the trees, that I didn't actually know any of the trees that I was walking by after having crammed for 10 days all about trees and life cycles of trees. And that was my first glimpse of like, wait a minute, what I'm doing isn't working for me. This studying, this school, this form of education is not actually having the results that I want. And so I left the next year. Luckily, I didn't quit. I just went on exchange, which was great. I went to Scotland, and as I arrived to classes there, I realized that all the marks were 100% final projects, and I didn't actually need to show up for any of the classes. I could just show up occasionally to kind of keep a finger on the pulse of what was going on, and then I could just travel. And so I did. I spent a lot of time by myself out in nature in the Highlands of Scotland and the Western Hebrides, the beautiful Western Islands, all on the West Coast. And it was the first time in my life that I was really by myself in nature a lot. And it was there that I realized that though I didn't connect with many of my teachers in high school or to that point, I was a teacher. And I also realized, and this is probably one of the most important realizations of a young, arrogant male life, was that I didn't have anything of value to offer the next generation at that point in my life. I was 20, 21 years old. I didn't know anything. And that wasn't a bad thing. That was so good for me to just be like, oh, okay, I have some work to do. I need to go seeking. I need to find something that I love and believe in to share with young people. So I went back to Queens the next year, finished, and then I left with that as my mission. And lo and behold, it was actually before I got back to Queens, I managed to use my time in Scotland and one of the work placements there to go down to Africa. I did a work placement on the White Nile in Uganda and spent 2 months rafting and got a Queen's credit for it. I felt pretty good about myself after that. That was great. While I was there, I met a man by the name of Henry Kutsia, who was one of my first, I would call, mentors. One of the first people that meeting him was like, it was like I was in a pinball game and I just hit a bumper really hard and changed directions immediately. He was one of those landmark people for me that opened my awareness to things that I didn't know were possible and sent me in a totally new direction. Because the people, now this is kind of a funny note. I have like, p.i.n.e was not my destiny here, because most of the folks that knew me in high school or university would never have guessed that I would turn out to be a person that started a nonprofit with his own money 10 years later. A lot of people are like, you did what? I wasn't that type of person. I was a real handful. Like I said, I made all the mistakes. And luckily, some mentors along the way helped me learn the really important lessons from those mistakes. So Henry was one of the first of those, and he sent me home really thinking about where I was going to go, what I was going to do, who I wanted to be. Because he was just one of those people that just lived life absolutely to the fullest and did it completely differently. I don't have the time to go into Henry's life, but he wrote a book called Living the Best Day Ever, which I highly recommend. If you want a different perspective on life, that is one. He would just take off and walk down the east coast of Africa, just because. He led the first source-to-sea expedition down the Nile in 100 and something years since the Nile was first traveled. This is now through war zones, through the Sudan, through croc and hippo-infested water. And he died actually the way he lived. A crocodile took him while he was leading an expedition. Surfaced from below, usually crocs charge. This one came from below. There's 3 kayakers in formation, really, really close. And they do this to look like a much bigger boat so that crocs don't come after them as often. But they were just used to like running away from crocs. They had guns on them and were constantly scanning the horizon. One popped up, grabbed him, and that was the way he went. Which I learned that was in 2010. and knowing Henry, if you'd asked him how he was going to go, that's exactly how he would have said he was going to go. So, I mean, that's the only sort of consolation for me in that. But he wrote a book, and I can't recommend it enough. It's just from a different time and a different place. So anyways, I went back to school, graduated, and promptly thereafter led a trip with a man by the name of Sean Day. Now, as I was 22-ish, thought I knew everything, had been leading canoe trips for 5 years already, spending a lot of time in the remote wilderness, loved it. And if you'd asked me if I was nature connected back then, I would have said, yeah, of course, like, duh. I spend all my time out there. I met Sean, and I realized, it was my first inkling that I didn't know much, because Sean lit all his fires. I had like 6 lighters on me at all times, and axes, hatchets. I was all the tools ready all the time. Sean would just pick up 2 sticks, rub them together, and he had a fire. And I was just blown away. Here was a man that could do things that I didn't even know were possible. I didn't even know there were options in the world until I witnessed him do them. He would make this fire by rubbing 2 sticks together, wander around the campsite, gather some plants and trees, make teas, and point out all the tracks and stories that the animals had left from the previous week or so. He'd just be telling me and the kids this, and the kids were like, yeah, whatever. I'm like, what? Tell me more. He actually gave me a book by Tom Brown Jr., who's the last person on this list. That again, as an 20, early 20 something, I remember Sean giving me this book, and I wandered over to this tree and kind of sat down. I remember it distinctly because it was one of those moments again where I sat down a different person than I got up, which again, for a pretty hard-headed young man, it's a rare occurrence to reconsider all of your steadfastly held values in the span of a very short amount of time. So I just remember reading this story. It's from Tom's Wild Edible and Medicinal Plants book. And go figure, his field guide to wild edible and medicinal plants starts with a story of him hunting his first deer with a short-range spear. So that the principle behind this was so that he would be there when the deer died, so that he could feel it. He was not removed, no supermarkets here. He knew exactly what he had done and exactly where his food came from. And that's the beginning of the plants field guide. That says a lot about Tom. He's a pretty intense guy. Fantastic mentor, very, very different human being. He changed my life incredibly, and I'm forever thankful for that. I don't in any way agree with everything he says. So if you Google him, just keep that in mind. So anyways, years and years later, I came back to Toronto. I was working with a bunch of different outdoor education spots, and I just kind of kept hitting the limits of what I knew were possible. After having gone down to the U.S. to all these different schools, wilderness survival schools, what had been for a long time called nature connection schools down there. Nowadays, they still are, but I see nature connection used all the time now. It's kind of like sustainable. It's everywhere. I was thinking about that as I watched the garbage trucks in Toronto, which they're like green, sustainable, environmental or something. That's what they're called. I'm like, oh, that's an interesting reframe for a garbage truck. It's very positive. Anyhow, so I see nature connection used everywhere, and I guess what I knew from my experiences down in the U.S. and being challenged in the ways that I had been to go into the wilderness and know enough to need nothing while I was there, I knew that there was much more available. I had some experience, and I had glimpsed, I had just touched the opportunity that there is to, as a human being, connect and know our natural environment. To know it as deeply as you know your child, or your husband, or your wife, the person you love most in the world. We can know the natural world and feel that same thing from the natural world. And I think that that's actually critical. I think that's where we have to go if we are to reverse some of the major themes that we are seeing in our culture today. So I started p.i.n.e, mostly because I had no idea what I was doing. And I knew that there was this great possibility for programming and experiences that kids could have. And I was naive enough and stubborn enough to think I could just start a nonprofit and it would be fine. Luckily, I am very stubborn, so a lot of 14 and 16-hour days later, it still was surviving and getting out there and giving kids enough experiences like these that all of a sudden we had wait lists. And all of a sudden my problem became I can't train staff fast enough to be good enough to deliver these types of programs to meet our wait lists. So that was great. That was a nice little transformation. So then these are just some of the images. These are some of the sort of most introductory images that I'll show today. And even in them, you probably are looking at that thing like, oh man, I can't do half of those things. I'm not allowed to have kids like right up against the streams or this, that, or the other. There's just, there's so many rules today, and I run into them a lot. We do at p.i.n.e, and I really see it not serving kids. I see it not serving us and not serving kids. And so I think that's one of the major things that we as a group, I will honestly say I do not have all the answers. I wish I did. When I was 20, I would have told you I did. But I don't have all the answers. We're trying to figure out a lot of like, how do we do what we know kids need in a world that won't allow it? How do we balance that? And then the reasons for why. So why do we do this work? Why do we push the edge? Now you've all probably seen things like this. You may not have all seen things like this. So this is a wigwam that we call them our Ravens. They're our preteen group that go out of the city to this amazing property near Georgetown, Ontario every week. And they built that with their hands. So neat. And it took a long time. But these kids just got way into it, and really this idea of children thriving when their bodies are challenged. This is what our programs are all about. We're really, and I would say even more than that, it's not about just challenging bodies. Kids are challenging everything all the time. Like, has anyone in this room not been challenged by a kid? They're challenging us, they're challenging each other, they're challenging the world around them, they're testing out the world, right? And it's not always malicious, even though sometimes it feels like it. Now, the danger is, though, that things are changing quickly, but when we look at from, say, the 80s until now, that's 30 years. So even though the styles have changed a little, the danger is for us, 30 years, though we each see change, and put up your hand if you have seen a difference in kids today than kids sometime in the past when you were working with them. Yeah. So it's probably some of these things that you're seeing. It's probably other things too. And I don't see too many positive changes. One of my mentors says, and this is a little bit negative, but it's also true. I've had, or at least I have a tough time refuting it. But one of my mentors often says, "We are currently raising the least resilient generation of children in the history of the human species." Really? Like, that sucks. It's all our fault, but it isn't our fault. Okay, and I'd like to separate the fault from responsibility, because there is an epidemic today of feeling as though we are at fault or wanting to always place blame. Something is wrong, so who can I point at? Does that do us any good whatsoever? Now, my experience is no. But if I start pointing the finger here and say, what can I do about it? How can I take responsibility? It might not be my choice that there's all these liability issues with kids picking up sticks. are doing X number of things that are good for them, but I can work around that. Or I can address it, I can fight it, I can do all sorts of things. I can connect with parents and talk about why it's important that we do the things they're terrified of us doing. And I can go and look for data to back me up. So I'm going to talk about this book in a bit. Anyways, I think we all know these things, both through our experience and also probably from reading a lot of data. Just the types of research that show up all over the Children in Nature Network website, the Children in Nature Alliance website. They just have like pages and pages and pages of research that basically says what we all already know. Childhood is in trouble, and we need to do something about it. Luckily, there's lots that we can do. Now, getting outside, how many of you are regularly able or have figured out some way to regularly get your kids outside? Yeah. Who is hitting so many walls that they just can't even get there? Who hasn't yet tried, but that's why you're here today? I want to learn more. I want to figure out how to get there. Okay, awesome. So, the beauty is, I know from my own experience that everyone here can ramp it up. I know our programs can ramp it up. That's my job continually, is to look at, okay, what are we not doing? How do we make this better? How do I learn something that I don't know? What am I not aware of and missing? And part of the danger that I recognize in starting p.i.n.e. is that I didn't grow up. I grew up in Toronto. I didn't grow up deeply, deeply connected. I didn't know all the plants and birds and trees and which ones I could eat and where I would go to make shelter if I needed it. I couldn't read the tracks of the animals on the landscape, all in the way that my ancestors used to be able to do. All in the way that all of our ancestors used to be able to do. And this is one of the things that I absolutely love about how we do things at p.i.n.e. So we use ancient knowledge. So primitive skills, knowledge of the landscape, and what I would say are older mentoring techniques, not newer. They're older ways of working with people that were learned by some of my mentors from their research of different people, different communities, living close to the land in indigenous and non-indigenous ways all around the world, looking at how do these people create resilience and a stronger next generation? What are their tools? And then asking the question, what are the similarities between these different groups around the world? What makes us similar rather than makes us different? So what they found were some pieces I'm going to really go into depth around later, but they started seeing these types of improvements 30, 40 years ago, way, way, way before there was even being research done on this. And so they knew they were onto something. Oop, hey-o, rawr. So I think we all know why we need to get outside. Everyone feel good about that? Okay, now, what is nature connection? This is the tough one for me, because I feel like I'm continually learning and relearning about the things that I didn't know because of the way I was raised. Now, I was raised in Toronto in the current modern Western society culture, where I would say actually the culture, if you were to describe what we spend the most time doing, so this is often a definition I use to describe culture, and culture has always been, throughout human history, a way of people understanding their landscape. It's the accumulation of stories and arts that help us understand the world around us and make sense of it. That's essentially a culture. So when I look at the culture I was raised in today, and I had to describe what I spent most of my time doing, it was either on media or learning to buy things. That was pretty much the culture I was raised in. And it explains really clearly why I knew all the logos of all the different companies in my life and on TV and all that way better than I knew any of the plants in my backyard. Right? So again, fault versus responsibility. I was born into this. It's not my fault.
I don't want to take that on. I don't need to feel bad about it. However, if I can use that to motivate me to actually take responsibility for it and change things to be how I want them to be, now I'm moving in the right direction. So, nature connection, I recognize I'm already 100 steps behind because I wasn't born into a family and a community where I was soaking in relationship and connection to the landscape. I wasn't hearing songs about the birds and about the plants and about kids going off on rites of passage and coming back stronger. I wasn't hearing stories of heroes that were going and experiencing all these challenges so that I could learn the life lessons in the stories. That culture wasn't there for me. But I was really lucky in that some of those mentors that I had pointed me towards curiosity. Pointed me towards questions like, why are you here, Andrew? What's your purpose? What do you believe in? And as an early 20-something male, I was like taking those questions pretty seriously. I was like, okay, I'm here to save the world. Guys, I need to figure out my purpose in life so that I can save the world. What I found is, in seeking, I found some things that I knew I was good at. I found what I was good at. I found what I believed in, and something I'd be willing to actually work really hard at, and something that made a difference. And that was the nature connection piece, and introducing kids to the outdoors. And what I've seen through both my experiences down in the U.S. at schools that are a little further ahead of us, and one thing that I didn't mention earlier is that p.i.n.e is an organization that is linked in to a network of schools all around the world. And we all use roughly similar techniques and mentoring methodologies, a lot of which are in here. And so I highly recommend this book. It's also a little bit crazy. Like I said about Tom, I learned a tremendous amount from Tom, and he changed my life completely. I also don't listen to every word he has to say. This book has unbelievable amounts of information, activities, ideas of how to connect kids to nature in it. It also has a methodology that really is in its intention is to kind of become a cultural tool to point people towards awareness of nature. So there's a lot of dogmatic language that would probably seem a little bit weird to a first-time reader in it. They use the directions, like the cardinal directions, a lot as a tool to point us to the way nature works in cycles. And this is something that in John, who is the lead author, and a lot of his research, something he saw amongst many, many cultures around the world, is paying attention to cycles in nature and the things that happen around us, and then applying those lessons to how we do things. So the intention here is amazing. The language sometimes turns people off. Sometimes it turns me off. So I just want to acknowledge that. But anyone I know that has read this book and looked at it from a point of what can I take from this, has walked away so thankful they did. There is so much amazing information in here, both from John and all of his mentors. So many different people, many different peoples, indigenous and not, from all around the world. And so there's a tremendous amount of gratitude that goes out to all of these people who have shared principles, not their culture. It's the Coyote's Guide to Connecting with Nature by John Young, Jonyoung, Ellen Haas, and Evan McGowan. You'll see it's in the bookstory thing up there. So, what this book talks about and what my experiences in nature talk about, or really point me towards, is that building a relationship and nature connection is about building relationship. So, luckily, we know how to relate still. Everyone here has probably been through a variety of different relationships with other people. We all have different relationships with other people. Now, I want you to imagine in your mind just one person that is very, very close to you. Doesn't have to be the closest, but someone that you just love dearly and you do almost anything for. Now, as you look up here, these 4 human needs factor into that relationship, or at least I put money on it that they do. The close relationships that we have are usually well balanced. They usually are with people who share values and we can speak to and relate intellectually, who we go through a range of emotions with and can connect with emotionally, who we have physical connections with. Imagine your partner in life, whoever that may be. Imagine never having touched them, but raising a family with them. Like, just doesn't make sense, right? We are built this way, to use all of these things. And then spiritual, whatever that means for you. Just the idea that maybe we don't have all the answers. And so in all these different ways, you've connected with that individual person, whoever it is, in all these different ways. And so you know how to build incredibly strong relationships. So now let's take that and apply that to nature and building a relationship between either yourself or with kids. It's like my favorite picture ever. This is these feet are from the craziest little girl that I've ever met in my life. She would come to our programs every single day with 2 sets of clothes and go home with both of them soaked, somehow. There would be no water in sight, and she'd somehow manage to go home soaked. It was great. Just to further dive into the relationship piece, one thing that I often see as a hazard in connecting with nature, and what I want to be clear about is that the ways that I see the words nature connection coming up today usually refer to one piece of a greater whole. So there's a quote that I love, and I believe it's from the Buddha, who says, "My teachings are a raft upon which a person can get from here to the other side of the river. Unfortunately, many people mistake the raft for the other side." Now, culturally, we have, I don't know whether it's culturally or just as humans, we have a tendency to love recency. The new things are just hot, and very often whatever's new is going to be the solution to all our problems. So in terms of nature connection, I see that coming up. And when I weave together all the different aspects of what nature connection can be, I see things like the amazing amount of energy there is behind like loose parts and risky play, and then like the naturalist communities are all about going out and like totally focusing on learning, and the field naturalist groups go out and teach their kids just about book learning, but don't touch anything, don't go off the path, and none of this is bad, they're all great, but they're just a part of the whole, and that's the important piece. So when I look at relationships and the relationships that I build with people, it helps me to remember that, like the field naturalist, if all I ever did was talk about books with someone, I would have a strong relationship in that area with them, but nowhere else. So that wouldn't be as strong a relationship or as holistic a relationship as I could have. So again, going back to this idea of connecting with nature, there's all different ways that we connect and build relationships. And here are some examples that touch on each of these things. In the Coyotes Guide, there's a lot of ideas and 13 different, what they call core routines. So, they're not the only things we can do, but they're 13 really good ones that these folks have found to do with kids over and over and over again to help them build relationship. Many of these are there. But when I think of a child, and especially children through a range of ages and developmental stages, I see these things as being incredibly important. Not all of them all at once. So if you're working with 3-year-olds, the idea of adventure and recreation would be very different from a 3-year-old as it would be for a teenager. The teens tend to like risking their lives. The 3-year-olds? Well, it's true. I mean, that was true for me. I needed to risk my life to know I was alive and know what was at stake. And it wasn't smart, but I did it a lot. And the 3-year-olds, the adventure might be from here to the doorway and back. And find all the bugs and the little things. Right? So developmentally appropriate ways of using all of these ways of being in nature are important. Now, obviously the curiosity and exploration is one you're all probably very well dialed into with the age of kids that you work with. They show up naturally curious. They ask so many questions, probably too many questions for you at times. And that like, why, thing keeps coming up. And I love that, because I just turn it right back on them. I'm like, I have no idea, what do you think? And that shuts them right up, and they start looking at it. What do you think? I don't know, let's try to figure it out. And they're like, oh, okay. I didn't know that was an available option. Creative play and imagination. Obviously, the free play movement, and this book, I really want to underline this one too. It's called Balanced and Barefoot by a woman named Angela Hanscom. I had a chance to go down and check out her programs and talk to her about this book. She's an occupational therapist, and if you are having trouble helping your parents or your administration understand why doing this is important and why the risks of not doing it are greater than the risks of doing it, her book is it. It talks all about what kids need in order to properly develop their balance, to develop their eyesight, to develop social emotional regulation, to develop strength. She talks about bone density being less dense now than it was 30 years ago. This is the whole 80s page. And all these things that are really kind of scary, or very scary to me. But she's all about the creative play and imagination, and I love that. However, there comes a point where it's important that the people with the most experience in the world lead. So I often think, when I talk to a lot of parents. I run a parent and talk program, and the p.i.n.e Project, it attracts a community of people that are oppositional by nature. They want to do things. Me too. I lead. I started this organization because I didn't want to do what was available. I wanted to do my own thing. All my staff fit into this as well. They know it. But as parents and educators, it's important to recognize that if we are constantly creating new ways of being, that's great. In fact, that's the only way change ever happens. However, trial and error has shown to only be successful a small percentage of the time. So if the risk you are taking around raising your children in a new way that you've just created or adopted that was just created a few years ago, and you're putting all your chips, your child's education and development into that new way of being, there's a pretty high risk that that way of being is not going to be around pretty shortly, because it's an experiment. This is why I love what we do, because it comes from our ancestors. And we know it worked because we're here. If it didn't work, we wouldn't be here. People did things really wisely for a really long time. And this is why I like talking about technology, and also talking about the frame of reference, or the metric with which we evaluate something. So I was kind of silly. I named the organization the Primitive Integrated Naturalist Education Project. Anyone in marketing will have already left the room. But the first word, primitive, that brings up a lot of challenges for a lot of people. Because traditionally, that means backwards. I was taught that primitive meant first, not worst. So I never even thought about it as backwards, but other people do. Oops. Because that's not the intention, right? That's not why we're using it. My experience was, I had the lighter when I was with Sean. Here I was looking to light the fire. I know how to light fires. I watch him pick up a stick and light a fire. after 2 years of practicing that myself and learning how to do it, I knew everything that it took. And I mean, I probably didn't know a lot of things, but I knew what it took, how much I needed to know about plants, about trees, about hard work, about failure, about commitment. That's what that 2 sticks rubbing together taught me. And the lighter stole it from me. I never got a chance to learn all those things until I was like, wow. Sometimes doing things the hard way actually is better for me. And then I slowly look at this. Like, what is this stealing from me right now? I don't even know my wife's number. Like, no wonder my memory is getting bad. Right? That's true. I hate that. So, removing technology, removing modern technology consciously from our work with kids at p.i.n.e. gives them more. And for us, it's all about framing the experience. How is this a challenge? How is this inspiring? How is this helping you learn? So that they're just wanting to dive deeper and deeper and deeper. It's like, how is lighting a fire with 2 sticks badass? And they're like, oh yeah, none of my friends can do this. Oh, I got this, guys. I don't need a lighter. Anyways, so all these things are really important. And I especially love the work and skill building. So seeing kids start to use a knife and gain the responsibility it takes to actually use that well. The growth I see is tremendous. And I have to have really clear boundaries. If they don't use that knife well, see ya, it's gone. That's a tool and a weapon, right? So all of a sudden the conversation becomes about trust and responsibility between me and them. And this is how kids become responsible, is by being given responsibility. Also by having it taken away at times. They have to know they can lose it. Also the subsistence activities. Anybody a gardener? So how do you feel about plants? How did you feel about plants before you gardened? What's the difference? There's something incredibly different. And when I think about my experience with the primitive skills and the survival skills, I think of a time when the first time I ever went out with nothing to try to survive in the woods. And I went out, I built a shelter. It's down in New Jersey, so there's ticks everywhere. I pulled 120 ticks off me in the course of 24 hours. It's disgusting. But I either do that or I don't do that. The risk? Well, I either never go into the woods, and what's the risk of never experiencing that versus getting to know the ticks and how I can manage this and how I can try to keep myself safe from Lyme disease and know my body and turn my senses way up so I can feel a tick when it's on me. There's opportunities in the challenge. It's not all good. I don't like ticks, but there's opportunities there. And then getting rained on all night. I built the shelter. I learned a lot about building shelters and how good mine wasn't when it rained for 6 hours. And then I remember coming home the next day. All I eaten was blueberries. That's all we could find. And coming home late the next day, soaking wet, cold, not very happy, and just walking into the kitchen and opening the fridge. It's like, that was so easy. And I cannot express to you the feeling I had when I just opened the fridge when I was hungry, compared to all the work that I had been doing to try to just simply feed myself out there. And the beauty is, so with subsistence activities, there's the opportunity to learn how hard it is to actually survive. You think of kids and the level of entitlement in the younger generation that is showing up today. Again, not their fault, but this is a way that we can take responsibility and give them opportunities to understand how hard it is. How we need to earn, whether it's food or our work or responsibility. There's so much opportunity here.
Natural consequences as well. Whew, love them. Let kids make mistakes. You want to jump in a puddle? Ooh, you're going to be cold for a while. That's okay. I keep them safe, but not always happy. That's part of how we work at p.i.n.e. And we talk to the parents about it, and we talk about the outcomes of what happens when the kid gets cold, isn't happy, and they come back the next week when they are happy, and we say, okay, what'd you learn last week? What'd you do? How'd it feel? Any lessons there? Are you going to change this week? I think of this one kid that I worked with for years and years and years. Love him. And he and his mom just, when it came to coats, like it was like 7 degrees and raining. Mom was like, Andrew, can you make him wear the coat? I was like, no, I cannot make him wear the coat, but I'll take the coat. And he was just like off running. He was fine. 2.5 hours later, we had the whole day. He's wearing like a full rain gear on his bottom, but then a t-shirt on top. It's been raining the whole time. We're all walking back. All the kids are totally covered head to toe in rain gear. He's got blue lips, and he's like 8 or 9 at this point. He just, we're walking along the path, headed home, and he just casually is like, hey guys, is anyone else freezing? And I looked at him like, hey, what are we wearing? He's like, oh, okay, right. And then he just went back and picked up his coat when we got there. And that's not the last time he did that, but I never had to yell at him about the coat. And there's like the natural consequences piece. Now, this I love. This came from conversations between John, the author of the Coyote's Guide, and one of his mentors, a man by the name of Gilbert Walking Bull. Gilbert, that's a whole other story. Gilbert was raised in North Dakota by traditional elders at a time when the reserves were starting to really take place, and the elders left the reserve because they were uncomfortable with what was happening. They took some kids. He was one of those kids. So he was raised traditionally. Years and years later, he and John met, and he got very involved with working with some of the kids that John was working with at Wilderness Awareness School. Gilbert turned to John at one point after working with the kids for a while. He said, John, this is amazing. Like, these are the attributes, like the sacred attributes of childhood are emerging in these kids that we're working with out in nature. And he talked to it, this is like something, a part of his lineage and culture, this like sort of metric for assessing whether they're raising children well. And when I looked at this again today, I thought back to that other slide about some of the challenges that are appearing today in childhood. The lack of risk management, risk assessment in kids. The physical issues and the lack of physical strength, the lack of endurance, the lack of ability to focus, and a lack of questioning. You just go down the list, and these are just in direct opposition to some of the challenges that are arising in childhood today. And I just thought about that last night. I was just like, wow, that's amazing. I have all these beautiful moments, pictures of kids that you never expect to be sitting there hugging a tree, knowing this boy, he's great, I love him to death. But that's a surprising photo. And then just kids being super ingenuitive with like huge burdock leaves as their sun hats, and learning about the plants and getting so muddy and just having no inhibitions. It's just such a beautiful thing. So, I'm going to tell one of these stories, not 4 of them. We don't have that much time. And I'm just going to skip to this one, Beyond the Edge. So, this is not that useful for you. This is our best program. This is years and years and years of kids deeply connected to nature. And one of our staff witnessed a deer get hit on the road. Called me up, said, hey Andrew, I just saw a deer get hit, it's dead. Is there an opportunity here? Because we always look at how is the challenge actually the opportunity. That's one of our like really important ways that we frame education with kids, whether it's a social challenge, a physical challenge, whatever it is. How's the challenge actually the opportunity?
So I got in the car, drove up there, we cleaned the deer on the side of the road, I took it home, really rinsed it down, made sure that like anything that was damaged was cut out. I have a lot of experience working with animals and processing animals, so I feel very comfortable doing these things and making sure it's safe. We brought the deer to the program a couple days later after it had been hanging, and our 7 to 10-year-olds and our 10 to 13-year-olds got to engage with it. So first, we talked about respect and how much this animal had given up for us to be able to experience this today. What does respect look like when working with this animal? And we all gave gratitude, talking about like, what do we feel thankful for today? Some was about the deer, some is just whatever the kids are feeling. But it's about creating a really special moment and a place that is different than just playing, because we're not allowed to play with the deer. So we're teaching cultural values here. At our programs, there's a time for being very respectful. Opportunities like this allow us to use that. Very, very challenging, and a lot of people, probably some people in this room, maybe are vegan and are really challenged by this. And that's okay. I'm not saying this is right. What I'm saying is that the kids got so much from this. They learned how to skin the deer, so there's biology lessons, there's anatomy lessons, there's respect and reverence, there's an idea of where food actually comes from. I heard from 3 or 4 separate kids at the end of the day saying to their parents who arrived later. So we skinned the animal, looked at all the different biological and anatomical lessons we could learn. That hide got tanned later and turned into clothing. We tried to use all the parts. And then we cut safe pieces of meat off and served them to the parents at our potluck that we were having later that day. So before anyone ate, the parents were aware of where it came from. They had a chance to check in if they had concerns. The kids and them didn't eat it. But they heard this story from the kids. And what kept coming up was, Mom, Dad, at the beginning of the day it was a deer, and now it's food. Yeah, that happens every day, 3 times a day. That's where our food comes from. And sometimes it takes that level of depth and that level of pain and that level of engagement to really actually understand. So I wanted to share that story, even though going back to your classrooms, you're probably never necessarily going to use this particular strategy, but it's just good sometimes to know how far it can go and that it's possible, should you want it. Now, today is really all about remembering the story. The way that I started the story is that, for me, I started off thinking I knew a lot and that I was connected. I now know that I'm nowhere close to nature connected. I probably never will be, but I can keep going on that journey until the day I die, and there's so much value in it for me, personally, and for my family, and for the kids that I work with. So I went down to California last year, and we met these amazing, amazing women who run it's a nature connection course for early childhood educators and kindergarten teachers and just people who work with young people. And they kept saying this over and over again. You cannot give what you do not have. So recognizing that, is there anyone in the room that knows everything about nature? Great. So we can all learn a lot today. And we don't know everything about nature, but some of our staff have some real specialties. And they are teaching all about plants and some cool activities to do with plants, birds and bird language, fire and working with fire and how to engage kids with that, but also you. So the goal today is for you to immerse and learn yourself. And then by the end of the workshop, for us to be talking about, okay, how can we use our own learnings and take them back to the kids? But the first step is always you. And I say this to my staff all the time. Who we are is what we're teaching the kids. More than anything we say. How we show up. What we're choosing to consciously or unconsciously role model is what we're teaching. So I invite you to push your edges, whatever those might be. Maybe I've already pushed them with the dead deer picture. I also, I think it's important to look at some of these things. That nature connection is a really long journey. It can be a lifelong journey. But if you don't start now, it's forever down the road. And it's just going to take longer and longer. So with the kids or with yourself, just start looking at like what's close. You know, a lot of the yards that we have are really limited in what they actually have in them. But they're exposed to whether it's like clouds and the wind and weather, or trees that are in the neighborhood nearby, plants and lawns. There's so many edibles and medicinals in lawns. Every single lawn has wild edible and medicinal plants in it. Guaranteed. Or not guaranteed, but like mostly guaranteed. And then there's ways that we can engage. Right? When we go back to like thinking about relationship and those deep, deep relationships, you know, the people that you're closest to, how much do you like them telling you what to do all the time? How much do you like them asking you questions, like genuine questions? You know? So there's ways that we can engage with the kids, be curious, and give them inspiration, and then let them run with it. And then for us, it's about kind of being those role models, those mentors that bounce them, you know, similar to that first mentor of mine that I kind of bounced into a new direction after meeting him. We can be those people for the young kids. And they need us to be. Because today, nobody else is doing it, or at least very, very few. Another key is learning with and in front of your students. Even if you know something, if a kid asks you a question, oh, what's this? Don't answer. It's like, oh my gosh, I have no idea. How are we going to figure it out? All of a sudden, you're learning with them. Now, there's a time for answers, right? At a certain point in an inspirational learning journey, we need an answer to push us further. So as educators, if we can be aware of that and constantly be asking the question, what's needed now? A question, an answer, for me to role model something, you know, for me to bring in like a cool stick that I've been working on, or, you know, something with that the boys are like, you know, I think of those boys that I work with that all they ever do is just fight each other with sticks. So I have sticks, like I have my best sticks that I bring in, and they're my hooks with those boys. Yeah, and they're not always boys. Sometimes they're girls, but often they're boys, just beating the crap out of each other for whatever reason. So then in there's also lots of ideas that you probably already thought of. Just growing plants, putting up birdhouses, planting trees, creating small raised beds and like little gardens in your centers or outside in the yard. Get to local parks, find the nearest fire pit. You know, whatever way you can, engage with the fire pit. Because wow, it brings people together, especially if you're going to invite the parents. Tell the stories of the kids' journeys and connections and the things they're learning. Your stories of connection, and tell it to the parents. And then back it up with some good data. Last thing, this is really, really important. Has anyone here ever felt stuck on this? Like you just hit so many walls, you're like, oh my god, I'm gonna like tear my hair out. I already did. Yeah. So I've been there. But I was just reading a book recently. I really liked what this guy was saying. He's saying, you know, this cycle happens. However, sometimes if you're stuck in the inspiration piece, just doing something, just taking action in any way can reignite inspiration. So I just encourage, you're going to be like the salmon, swimming upstream. And in order to birth the next generation that is needed, you got to hit some rocks. You're going to end up beaten up and bruised. There's going to be some challenges. I know it. I've been there. I am there. It's not easy. The mainstream is the current rushing the other way. And we see something that is needed. For it to be brought into the world, sometimes we just have to do something, even when we don't know what to do. So I encourage you just to have other people to connect with, talk to other people. There's a lot of answers in this room. And then just don't be afraid to take action, even if you don't know what you're acting on. And then we got a couple resources that I've been mentioning throughout. So Coyote's Guide, can't recommend this enough. Also take it with a grain of salt. It's a bit weird, but I love it. This one's so amazing for talking to your administrators, your parents, helping them understand why is this important? Why is this critical? And then also, my experience is that to change the way I am, I have to immerse in a different way of being. It's very hard for me to just change by thinking things. I need to experience them differently, whether that's going to a different culture, or for me, to change my mentoring techniques, I had to go work with people and apprentice under them because they were doing things reactively in the way I wanted to be. Whereas my reactions were all trained by how I was taught in school, which was not how I wanted to be. So I was reacting with like, stop that, blah, 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 you know, whereas my mentors were really reacting in ways that served the kids and served their relationship. So I spent a lot of time just volunteering and apprenticing. We run training programs that are really great. The Wild Deer Adult Training Program is about you. It's about your own knowledge and skill building and giving you tools that you can take into your life and inevitably into your kids' or families' or community's life. We're currently designing a program specifically for early years educators. So stay tuned. You can hop on our newsletter if you want information about that. Just go on our website. Nikki, you don't have the list? No, we didn't bring the list. Just go on our website, p.i.n.e.project.org. And then we got lots of programs for the kids, for family, to really create a culture of nature connection in your family, which is it's an amazing, amazing thing to see the little kids having mentors that they look up to that are inspiring them in ways that you want them to be inspired. That's good parenting design. Kids getting something from someone that's not you. It's great. It makes it way easier. You're like, oh my God, that's so cool. Tell me more about why we should go outside as a family. Anyways, that's it for me. We got some workshops coming up. Thank you so much.